Welcome to the Acting for Stage and Screen podcast. My name's James Harvey, and I'm the programme leader of a brand new acting degree in York, created in partnership with ALRA, the Academy of Live and Recorded Arts. It's called the BA in Acting for Stage and Screen, ALRA endorsed. More on that in a bit. The idea of this podcast is that I'll be interviewing loads of successful professionals within the theatre, TV and film industries. Lots of actors, but also people working in other areas of the industry too. Directors, writers, producers and so on. Through chatting with my guests, I want to find out about their careers, their methods, and to get an honest insight into what it's like working professionally in stage and screen. I hope you enjoy the pod. And if you're someone who wants to train professionally as an actor, then take a look at our course. Follow us on Instagram at York College BA Acting and go to our webpage to find out more. You can apply on UCAS course code BA45. We're auditioning this year and we start teaching in September 2021. Maybe you'll be with us. I'll give you some more information on the degree at the end of the pod. But for now, I hope you enjoy this episode of the Acting for Stage and Screen podcast. Welcome to the Acting for Stage and Screen podcast. Today's guest is Clare Slater. Clare is the head of new work at the celebrated Donmar Warehouse Theatre in London. Before that, she was the executive director of the Gate Theatre in Notting Hill, and she was the assistant literary manager at the National Theatre. She's also a freelance adapter and dramaturg, so there's a lot of strings to her bow. Let's find out about them. Welcome, Clare.
Thanks for having me, James.
Oh, you're very welcome. Well, thanks for coming on. Let's begin with asking you about your work at the Donmar then. So, the head of new work, what does that involve?
Involves lots of different things, but basically it means that I work across all of the new plays that we commission at the Donmar and that we stage. So my job is a lovely job. I get to find the writers that we want to commission. I get to help them in lots of different ways, I hope, developing their new plays for the Donmar.
I was really interested in the modern adaptation by Bruce Norris of Brecht's classic The Resistible Rise of Arturo. How was that process then? That is a modernisation, I suppose, of a text that was already an interesting drawing of parallels between gangster culture in America in the 1930s and the rise of the Nazis in Germany. So tell me about The Resistible Rise of Arturo.
That remains to this day one of my so far favourite productions to work on for loads of different reasons, but probably fundamentally because it was being made by really lovely, incredibly talented, funny people, and so that as a package is just a lovely way to work. So what was that about? My artistic director at the time, the lady who at that stage was running the Donmar Warehouse, was a woman called Josie Rourke, and she decided, as is her job, that she wanted someone to do a new version of The Resistible Rise of Arturo. And she wanted to do that. It was very clever of her, because it was at the time, gosh, what year were we in? I'm blanking slightly.
Well, it was when
Trump was exactly
on the electoral warpath. So, yeah.
And and it was exactly around the time that he became the Republican frontrunner, or maybe, in fact, he hadn't even been picked because of the timing of it. It would have been before that. But anyway, it was looking likely that he was going to be. And there was also, that was one element of it. But there was a very clear, as there continues to be, a clear rise of the far right across Europe in various different countries. And in some countries, a very clear rise of fascism again, which, of course, is a very unnerving echo of almost exactly 100 years ago, as is the history cycles of politics. They were ever thus. They do tend to move in these very unnerving 100-year history cycles. So we were observing, and I suppose we still are, and it's something we are all quite anxious about a sort of rise of the far right and what that might mean in general. So, as I say, the artistic director at the time, Josie, could absolutely see this pattern, and a lot of her programming was really to directly reflect the politics of the time.
I mean, at the time of the production, it felt sort of predictive, although obviously Josie and yourself were sort of seeing it happen in reality. But you look around at what's happening now, it feels like it's absolutely kind of come to pass. We're seeing fascist politics everywhere we look, really, aren't we?
Absolutely. It was a production that was made at quite a lot of speed, actually, which and a lot of her programming was done really to speak directly to current affairs, which means that we had to be working very, very quickly the whole time in order to not feel out of date. But unfortunately, I think the commissioning and production of The Resistible Rise of Arturo could not have been more pertinent. And we'll talk maybe later about how it was received, because it was almost too pertinent. People said it was too on the nose, and that was at the time thought of as a criticism, which I think is fascinating. But anyway, so Josie knew that she wanted to do a version of it, and we all had fun brainstorming who should do that version. And the top of our list was the brilliant Bruce Norris. And it's sort of like a dream, a kind of fantasy football. If you could put together a Brecht play that is clearly about, exactly as you said, the rise of the Nazis, but set in Chicago gangsterland, then who's that playwright? And that is Bruce Norris. He lives in Chicago. He was an actor first, became a writer through working with the Steppenwolf Theatre Company in Chicago, and became one of America's most exciting and controversial playwrights. He is not afraid of saying tricky things to people and addressing controversial subjects and really skewering liberal politics, which is, I think, very healthy for the theatre. So he keeps people on their toes. Anyway, I dropped Bruce a line, and long story short, he got excited to do an adaptation of a sort of, as you said, a sort of modernizing version of Arturo Ui. And it was perfect timing for him. He, I think he was in the middle of, he'd just finished Downstate, like as in on his computer. Like, I think he'd just finished an original play. And I think that process has tired him out quite a bit, as it always does with writers. So to have another theatre in London who he's not worked with before, the Donmar, call him up and go, hiya, are you interested in doing a version of someone else's play, of a Brecht play? He sort of, it was just very lucky. He bit our hand off. I think he really liked the idea of working alongside Brecht, of kind of treading in his footsteps, rather than having to dream up a whole new play himself. I think it was an intellectual exercise he really had the capacity for at that moment in life. It was just very lucky. So with enormous speed, like crazy Donmar speed, Bruce wrote a version, or did I think what the estate like to call a new translation of Brecht's play. And he maybe did it in like 3 or 4 months, which is very, very fast. And he did it knowing.
Fast, sorry, I was just going to say, as with many sort of great playwrights, the playwright's estate can sometimes have problems with new versions of the productions, can't they?
Yes, you have to work really, really closely with, that's a big bit of my job, depending on what we're doing. If we're doing a new version of something that's in copyright, which all of Brecht's plays currently are still in copyright, which means that all of the rights are protected by an estate, a literary estate, who really want to make sure that any new productions of Brecht's work are given, are put on beautifully and with great integrity, and always honour the original. So you can't change them. Or if you want to change stuff, you have to work with the estate and get permission. They have to approve the writer. They have to approve the writer's take. If you're going to cut stuff, the estate needs to approve it. It's a really, really close relationship. And so a bit of my job when we do that is to make sure that those literary parties are all speaking to each other, and that everyone's got permission to make the changes they're going to make, and stuff that's quite complex but fascinating. And the estate approved Bruce, and they approved his proposal of what he was going to do to it. And they also approved the director, and you have to kind of go right round the houses to make sure that they're really, really happy. Often because what you're doing is you're probably working with the grandchild or the great grandchild of the original writer. So you're talking to someone about their inherited family's art. So you have to be, and you want to be, really, really respectful of that. So Bruce wrote this new version of Arturo, and we brought on the great director Simon Evans to direct it. And once Simon was on board, I then sort of operated, I guess, between the Donmar was one triangle, one point of the triangle between Bruce, Simon, and the Donmar, and I would often represent the Donmar. And then closer to production, that would also, of course, be our artistic director, would have loads of opinions and help shape the production. And so we moved on at great speed, and Bruce wrote this barnstorming adaptation of Arturo Uri. And what happened halfway through his writing process was that Trump became elected as America's new president. And I remember calling Bruce up the day afterwards going, how are you? He was like, I can't leave my apartment. I can't go out. And I think what happened, he went back and to the top of the play and did a rewrite of the whole work out of absolute fury, because he really felt like America had just elected a new Arturo Uri. And the parallels, as you said, are quite uncanny, but you had to be very mindful of what has and what has not happened under Trump. But his politics, there are lines in the play that are exactly identical to in the original play to speeches that Trump gives now and then. It was uncanny. So Bruce really vented his fury through the play, and then we put it on, and Lenny Henry played Arturo Uri, and it was a company and a cast absolutely packed full of talent.
An amazing
cast, loads
wasn't
of
it?
Music and flair and jokes, and then it's not funny. So it did all the stuff that a great Brecht play can do: sweep you up in the entertainment of it, and then smash you down.
Absolutely. Have you roaring in the aisles, and then confront you with what it is you were really laughing at. That's the murderous massacres of a people, I suppose.
Exactly. And the director had this very clever take that he worked with Bruce to achieve, which was a huge amount of audience involvement, which totally threw Donmar audiences because they are not used to that. And that was a way of making the audience feel absolutely complicit in the choices or the accidental rise of Arturo Uri, simply because they didn't stop something. A terrible thing happened, and the production asked audience members to stand up, asked audience members to get involved. It sort of embarrassed a British audience who were like, oh, I'd rather not, so I'm just going to sit down if that's okay. And so that proved the point that because you didn't stand up and protest.
So Josie's since left the Donmar, and Michael Longhurst is the artistic director now. And I think one of the more recent productions you worked on was Blank, Alice Birch's play.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
That was last year. Was it possibly this time last year? And that was a co-production between the Donmar Warehouse and Clean Break. And Clean Break is a brilliant company that absolutely your listeners should become familiar with. They have been running it was actually last year was their 40th anniversary year, so it was a big celebratory year for them. So they've been going for 40 years, and they are a theatre company who work exclusively with women who, in one way or another, whose lives have been touched or involved or affected by the criminal justice system. So it was set up by two women who themselves had been to prison and had come out, and I think whilst they'd been in prison had someone had come in, I think, and delivered some theatre workshops, and they'd understood the power of theatre and working together and collaborating with their fellow inmates at the time, and learning how to communicate in a different way and share their feelings in a different way. And so they'd come out of prison and had that kind of revelation, I suppose, about how powerful even a small interaction of theatre had been for them in their own lives at that time. So they decided to set up their own theatre company that was going to be dedicated to going into prisons and working with women in prison and helping them communicate themselves and feel more connected to the people around them, and with the aim, I think, of coming out of prison, having a great sense of confidence and self-worth and an opportunity that's available to them. So Clean Break has been doing that work in prisons and with women whose life has been affected by the criminal justice system in one way or another for 40 years. And Blank was originally commissioned by them. So they had commissioned Alice Birch to write a play, and I think they'd given quite a broad remit for what that could be. And she'd spent many years, I think it was actually her very, very first commission, but she spent many years trying to decide what she wanted to write, and so she hadn't written it for a long time, which is often the way, and totally understandable with writers. You just need to keep thinking. You can't rush these things. And then she combined that commission with the National Theatre Connections Commission, which is the festival that the National has been running for many years, creating new plays to be about young people, performed by young people up and down the country. It's this amazing youth theatre festival.
Fantastic festival. Probably a lot of people that are thinking of going on to a drama school course, like the BA in Acting for Stage and Screen at York College with Alra, will have participated in some of the National Theatre Connections productions all around the country.
Yeah, of course, you're absolutely right. It has such an enormous reach, so I'm sure some of your listeners will have been part of that. So Alice combined her National Theatre Connections Commission with her Clean Break Commission into one play, and wrote something that I have never come across, the likes of which I have never come across before.
So this is like the holy grail that you spoke about at the start of our conversation, the thing that was going to be something you'd never seen before.
Exactly. She wrote a series of 100 scenes, some of which were to be performed only by young people, so hence the connections bit, and some to be performed by adults, and some a mixture of the two, but all women, all female characters. Clean Break never worked with anyone other than women. And she wrote these short snippets. Sometimes I think of them as like mini playlets. Some of them would be, 3 pages long, 5 pages long. Some might just be totally non-verbal and would be an image that you'd see. And the whole the whole play together of these 100 scenes was, I can't remember, let's say it was like 250 pages long. So every time she wrote a new draft, you were like, right, buckle in. This will be a day's worth of reading. And the scenes themselves were not directly interconnected in any way.
So there's no linear route through it. So is it the case that you can pick and choose an order, or you can elect if you haven't got 250 pages worth of time to put on a show, then you can go, oh, well, we'll just take these 10? Or...
Yeah, quite. So she's got these great instructions right at the top of the play for whoever chooses to produce it in the future, saying like, this is an invitation, and the invitation is to the director and the acting company to pick the scenes they want to pick and perform, to put them in whatever order they want to put them in, to cast them in whatever way they want to, because naturally if you cast one actor, all the scenes are only sort of attributed sort of woman A, woman B, woman A, woman B, woman A, woman B. So you are able to insert your own names if you want to, quite literally your own name, but you can make up names.
It's a really generous spirit that's offered in by the playwright, isn't it? It's here is the materials for a production, offering it to whichever director and actors are going to put that production on to make of it what they will, and even in the terms of those kind of archetypal naming of characters, it doesn't restrict it. It sounds like, as you say, it's an invitation to create something fresh every time.
Absolutely. It's sort of like a kind of choose your own adventure. It's much like that's a sort of classic 80s or 90s children's book reference, but in many ways, sort of like gaming, in that you can pick your own character and take them on an adventure in the way that you want to. And the point of that form. So Alice always writes in a sort of really bold, interrogative place of form. She's always questioning the form of theatre, the shape in which we tell the story. It doesn't just have to be like the hero's journey of woman or man goes out on the quest and solves quest and comes home again. Alice is always questioning the form that we tell our stories in. And this was no exception. She was marrying up the fragmented form of her play, which she had called Blank because she was simply that was the clue, I guess, in the title, that this play could be about anything for anyone. So the title was
Blank. It alludes to blank canvas as well, I suppose, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. All of that. And through that fragmented form and that invitation for you to self-author your way through it, she was saying, was the big political point that she was making, which is this stuff can happen to anyone at any time in their life, in any unpredictable moment, that there are hundreds and thousands of ways that your life might be touched by or taken over by aspects of the criminal justice system. That part of society is not limited to any one type of woman or any one corner of a city. It affects all of us in many, many different ways. And so she found the perfect form to match that political content. And that's why I think she's one of the most exciting writers today, because she is restless in her interrogation of how we tell a story, let alone what story she's telling, which is also always fascinating and heartbreaking.
Alice Birch, remember the name.
Alice Birch, people. Get involved in her work. It is great. Well, we put that play on at the Donmar for the first time in collaboration with Clean Break. And it was fascinating, absolutely fascinating process, because of course we had to, our director, Maria Eberg, brilliant director, was the first person, I suppose, to take up Alice's invitation, to pick the scenes, to put them in an order, to cast them in a way that meant that you can imagine if actor A is playing this character in this scene and then we see that same actor again later, we're naturally going to think, is that the same character? Are we seeing a new part of their life? What does that mean if we are? It was the most complex piece of dramaturgy, entirely led by Maria Eberg as director. It was a very, very complex show to work on, and it was beautiful, really beautiful.
I think you've actually really beautifully sort of evoked everything that theatre people, and of course include all kind of storytellers in that, are looking for. There, something exciting, something new, something fresh, and something that offers the collaborators who are going to work on it from every level, from dramaturgical, directorial, and performance, a new way of telling a story. Sounds wonderful. We've talked about.
Great.
Oh, good. Before working at the Donmar Warehouse as the head of new work, you had a different kind of role. Tell us about that.
So I applied and was lucky enough to get the job to be the executive director of the Gate Theatre in Notting Hill, as you said earlier. Now, the Gate is a tiny, tiny fringe theatre in London, above a pub. Classic outfit, started in the 70s, when a lot of the pub theatres really started in London, and has flourished ever since, with loads of famous directors and actors who sort of started there when they were barely out of nappies and are now major filmmakers or Hollywood stars or whatever. They all started at the Gate. But I was lucky to go and spend 4 years running the Gate from the business point of view. That's what an exec director does.
For those that don't know, the Gate's kind of renowned, isn't it, for producing international work?
Yes, exactly. So it was set up when its founder, Lou Steiner, I think it was 1979, was looking at, he was an American chap, And he came to London and looked around going, well, no one is staging American work in London. That's something I could do. So he set up his own theatre. And since then, it's always had this backbone of, as you say, international programming, and different artistic directors have interpreted that differently. And the one I work with, Christopher Hayden, he returned the gate really to some of its American roots. So we staged a lot of American plays, not least because a lot of brilliant new writing is and was coming out of America at the time. And that's when I met Bruce Norris, just to circle back, alongside loads of other great American playwrights. So I spent 4 years running the business, actually. So it wasn't a on paper creative job at all. I was learning how to run the finances, apply for Arts Council funding, do all the other fundraising as well.
I remember a production, I think, was it a one-woman show? Not sure. Grounded by George Brant.
Yeah, it was a one-woman show. Yep.
And that was the story of a female fighter pilot who's pregnant, and so she can't go flying in reality anymore. But then there's this really interesting, it's not a twist, but it's a different perspective of this woman sort of going off and sitting for 12-hour shifts every day in a trailer in Vegas and bombing the Middle East using drones, isn't it? And,
exactly.
Well, tell us more.
So you totally nailed it. Grounded was, is a play written by the brilliant American playwright George Brant, and it was a play that really made his name in the States. And my artistic director at the time had a great nose for the best new plays coming out of America, so Chris spotted it. It had already been done in the States, and we gave it. No, what was it? Actually, in the end, did we give it technically the world premiere, but we weren't allowed to call it the world premiere because I can't remember, some theatre, maybe in Philadelphia, had already got the rights to call their production the world premiere, but it opened like 2 weeks after ours. Anyway, technicality.
That sounds like the same logic that makes American sports champions world champions just by default, even though
exactly they got there first. They got the rights to use the title world first. Anyway, Grounded was charting a crucial moment in the change of warfare for all of us. It was charting the difference between going to war as a member of the military and putting yourself at risk as you said, as a fighter pilot, or I mean, that was what this play was about, but of course you could swap in any kind of other person in combat. And then there's that moment where that is shifted because of technology, where now you can go to war from a trailer in Vegas by being a drone fighter pilot. So you yourself are not at risk. You're not putting your own body in harm's way anymore. It's a very different type of going to war. And as I think either George, how he described the play, or maybe it's a quote from his own play, but essentially you're commuting to war every day, and then you go home and hang out with your young child and husband, as this woman did.
That's a brilliant phrase, commuting to war. The juxtaposition of meanings there is really kind of powerful, isn't it?
Deeply unnerving and obvious, and brings with it all of the moral questions that you would imagine that phrase brings about. And that's what the play was. The play was charting how she felt as someone who'd been trained in one particular way. Then this life change happened to her. She had a child. It wasn't possible for her to be pregnant and go in F1 fighter pilots anymore. That's not allowed. So she got a desk job, and then she never was able to leave the desk job. But the desk job became bombing from a trailer in Vegas. And it's a very, very powerful monologue, which, by the way, for all your listeners, should go away and read that play. It's such a brilliant play, packed full of very good monologues, as you can imagine, because that's the structure of the whole piece. And we did that at the Gate, and it was a massive hit. We actually started it at the Edinburgh Festival with the brilliant performer Lucy Ellenson, who later came to the Donmar to perform in Arturo Ui. Small connections.
It's a relationships business, people.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I didn't cast her, but it was a real pleasure I spent so many years working with her on Grounded that it was lovely to then work with her again at the Donmar. It opened at the Edinburgh Festival, and it got these crazy 5-star reviews. Her performance was absolutely astounding. the production that our director, Chris Hayden, gave it was stunning. It was just the go-to show of that year. And anyone who's performed or taken a show up to the end of the festival knows like that can whip up a frenzy and it just goes crazy. It never happened to me before, ever. And it was amazing. And I think it's because the play was talking about such an important thing and was made by such brilliant artists. It was just the perfect combination. Anyway, we brought it back down to Notting Hill. It was this big hit, and we extended it again, and then we had interest. People wanted to tour it around the world, so we took it to Washington DC.
Oh wow!
Which was amazing because Brits taking an American play.
And
a lot of the American audience didn't realise Lucy was British until she'd come and do like a post-show talk afterwards, and their jaws would drop because her English accent would they'd suddenly go, "Oh my God, you're not American!"
I mean, the symbolism as well of taking a play that interrogates the art of American warfare in the capital city where those decisions are made.
Well, that's it. It would have been one thing to take it to New York, but we couldn't because there was always someone else was doing a production in New York, so we weren't allowed. So we took it to Washington DC, and it couldn't have been more potent because all of these like American like Congress people came to see it and had chats afterwards, like post-show talks about the pros and cons of this kind of warfare. Now that is theatre.
What an experience.
Genuinely influencing power. It was sort of amazing. And not so apparently I didn't get to go because the gate has zero money. So very few people actually got to travel to America with the show. So sadly I didn't get to go.
But, if it had happened more recently, you could have just zoomed in, Claire.
I know. Why didn't this was apparently this is almost pre the internet, except it wasn't. We didn't have this kind of digital language at the time, did we? It was a great show, and it toured to Sweden, it toured all around the UK, and it just kept going on and on and on. That was one of my favourite things we made when I was at the Gate, because it mattered. It was really saying something to the world.
That's what theatre should be doing all the time.
Yeah,
of course.
Every time.
It should also entertain.
It can do both. Yeah. These things are not mutually exclusive.
Very good. Very true. So I don't want to rush over your experiences as executive director, but you've already been really generous with your time. I wanted to ask you right now how you see theatre responding to the COVID crisis, which is enveloping the world, of course, and has had a dramatic effect on the theatre industry, of course. So what's the Donmar's response been? What are your hopes for the future in light of what's happening in the world over these last 5 or 6 months?
Well, you've said it. It's been a really tumultuous time for the whole industry, let alone for the whole world. So we've all been finding our own feet, haven't we, personally and professionally, amongst the totally uncharted territory that we find ourselves in right now. But fundamentally, theatre and the performing arts have really taken a hit because all we do is bring people together in a space to see something together, to listen to something together, to watch something together. And we haven't been able to congregate. That's not allowed anymore, or at this moment. So I think it's led the whole industry to quite a kind of existential crisis, some of which, when I'm feeling positive, I believe will have a really positive impact for the future as we reimagine what bringing an audience to see a show together means and what it could mean and the value of it, the potency of that, how we might want to do it differently, how we might want to do it better, how we might want to make sure that those audiences are truly representative of all of society rather than a sort of subset of folks who can afford to come to the theatre. I think there are big questions about what we do and why are being asked right now. I think for a lot of theatre buildings and companies, an important point to make that once they're up and running, they never stop. They're always in production. And at worst, that can be quite a treadmill that is a sort of self-perpetuating, have to keep going because we need to get more audiences in because we need more money so that we can keep going, so we can get more audiences in, so we can get more money so that we can keep going. And it's been ever thus for a lot of really lucky buildings, theatre companies. And now recently we had to stop. And that's left everyone going, oh my gosh, who am I? I don't know what I do anymore. This is, it's really hard questions. But in the stopping, we've had a bit of time and space to go, why do we do this? Are we doing this in the best possible way? Could we be doing this better? Could we be distributing the power or the decision making amongst a broader group of people, a different group of people? How could we structure our whole industry in a different way? So when I'm feeling positive, I feel like the pause has provided a small bit of space, albeit quite a scary bit of space, to reconsider how we make theatre and why, with whom and for whom.
Those questions of with whom, for whom, who's involved, they're being asked globally at the moment, particularly in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement, and lots of drama schools and theatres over the last month or two have kind of issued fairly formal responses to say that they stand with the values of the Black Lives Matter movement. Do you see in this existential crisis or this moment of reflection for the theatre hope of a increasingly diverse theatre making populace?
I really do. I feel like this is a significant moment of change. And I've only been working in the theatre industry for, as I say, maybe like 15, 16 years or something. And I've done lots of really different types of jobs, as you've been kind enough to listen about.
And it's been a pleasure.
Heard variations of this conversation for many years. Quite infuriatingly so in many ways, because the industry has been really self-aware that it has, at worst, a very singular view made by a very particular subset of the community, which is predominantly white and middle class and often very male. And the whole industry has known that about itself for a long time. And I've been part of these conversations for change for a long time. I feel like I've heard other people in power talking about them, is what I mean. And actually right now, through the Black Lives Matter movement, combined, I think it's the fact that it's particularly combined with the conditions for potential change made by the coronavirus crisis. I really feel like this might be a moment we move from self-reflection and self-awareness to actual change in the industry, where those people in power, particularly those who run the theatre companies or whatever you might think of when you think of someone who's in power, someone in influence in the industry, whoever they are, really now might actually be able to put their money where their mouth is and start telling a different type of story, a greater diversity of stories, sharing a different perspective on our stages, working with a far wider exceptional talent pool of artists to make those stories. I just think that if it's handled right, this is the perfect time to move from words into action. And I also think there's something about it being the era, and this is going to make me sound like a total grandma, but I'll call it the era of Twitter, but you know what I mean, I hope. 10 years ago, there wasn't social media, which essentially holds people to account in a very, very different way now. Well, that also exists. There's a jury out there of the greater public, and there is a space for artists to have a really loud and meaningful voice and to have an opinion on when those people in power don't do stuff right or don't do what they say they promised they would do. So it's that combination of the conditions for change made possible through this pandemic, the power of the movement and the importance of what it's saying in and of itself, and I guess the communication environment of Twitter, of social media, where it's not okay anymore just to put out hot air. You now need to follow it up with actual change. Otherwise, you'll lose your job. That's what I think people in power will no longer be able to just stay in their nice posh jobs if they don't really make real change.
Because without...
So I am hopeful.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful to hear, and really beautifully put, Claire. I think really a positive, hopeful message. It just remains for me to thank our guest today, Clare Slater. Thank you so much for joining us, being so generous with your time, Claire. It was really fascinating hearing about your career journey and all those fantastic productions you've worked on. And listeners should be aware that Claire was especially generous, really, to interviewers now, because like the lead character in George Brant's Grounded, she is also expecting a baby very imminently. So fortunately, we got away with it. She didn't go into labour during the interview, but Claire, you're now free to go off and have your first child, should you?
Thank you, that's great.
Well, thanks again, and all the best in the future. Clare Slater.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for chatting to me.
Before you go, I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about our new acting training degree, the BA Acting for Stage and Screen Aura endorsed. This is a unique drama school informed training delivered at the York College University Centre and is suitable for students who are determined to become professional actors working in today's theatre, film and TV industries. It's unique in a few ways. Firstly, because this course is created with and endorsed by ALRA, the Academy of Live and Recorded Arts. ALRA are one of the UK's very top drama schools and bring with them a national and international reputation for excellence in higher education drama training. Our close partnership with such a well-respected drama school will be invaluable for our training professionals. Another way we're unique is that our course is a 2-year accelerated degree, so you can achieve your degree, become a professionally trained actor and enter the acting profession more quickly and with fees of only £8,640 a year. This is because we're really conscious that the overall cost of funding degree study has massively increased over recent years, and a 2-year accelerated programme will be vastly less expensive than the conventional 3-year drama training route, especially when you take into account living costs, fees over the lifetime of a course, and shorter time studying before entering the profession. It's a full honours degree with 26 hours of contact time per week and a wide range of opportunities to perform and to network with industry professionals. If you decide at the end of the 2 years that you want to continue your studies, then there is the possibility of studying at master's level at ALRA. So if this sounds like the kind of place you can imagine yourself being, learning practically how to be an actor on both stage and screen, and getting loads of really meaningful performance experience, being seen by industry professionals, and maybe going on to do a master's at ALRA, or just getting into being a working actor quicker than your peers, then you need to apply to the BA Acting for Stage and Screen ALRA endorsed through UCAS, course code BA45. You'll be asked to audition with us, and if you're successful, we will work with you to make your experience an exceptional 2 years, which will set you on the course towards your future success. Keep following us on Instagram at York College BA Acting for exciting announcements throughout the year, and do keep listening and subscribe to the Acting for Stage and Screen podcast for more conversations with fantastic theatre, film and TV industry guests in the future.